but in the end, Lulach was assassinated and supplanted by Malcolm III, the second founder of the Dunkeld dynasty, which would rule for another 2 centuries. Malcolm's nickname was Canmore, literally meaning big head, though it was probably meant to convey something more like great chief. His second wife, Margaret of Scotland, is Scotland's only royal saint. She was a member of the House of Wessex, and her daughter Matilda married Henry I of England. So all English monarchs from this point onward can trace their roots back not only to William the Conqueror and Charlemagne, but also to Alfred the Great and the original Royal House of England, as well as Kenneth MacAlpin and the original Royal House of Scotland. After the death of Malcolm III, Duncan II fought with his uncle Donald III over the throne and won, but then was ousted in an uprising and killed, bringing Donald back to power. It's not entirely clear what became of Donald in the end, but Duncan's half-brother Edgar came to power in 1097 with the support of the English king William II, and inflicted some sort of harsh punishment on his uncle. Edgar then passed the throne to his brother Alexander I, who had a son who planned to inherit the crown, but something interesting happened instead. David, the youngest of Margaret and Malcolm's children, had been exiled by Donald III and grown up in England, and in that time he'd earned the favor of the English king Henry I. So when Malcolm MacAlexander stepped up to be the new king of Scotland, David came marching in with an English army and took the throne for himself. As king, David expanded his kingdom and exerted his power through many parts of Scotland that were previously part of the kingdom very loosely. He even went as far as to invade parts of northern England after Henry I died, and he took part in the war between his successors. Meanwhile, Scottish society flourished under the so-called Davidian Revolution, in which the king founded markets across the land, reformed the clergy, and restructured his government. Another interesting thing about him, he's recognized as a saint and is the patron of several churches in Scotland, but was never formally canonized. After David is his grandson, Malcolm IV, also known as Malcolm the Maiden, not because he was secretly a woman in disguise, but so named for his religious zeal and chivalry. Malcolm faced challenges from the sons of Malcolm MacAlexander, and he had to pay homage to King Henry II for the lands he held in English territory. He died young and without children, so Scotland fell to William the Lion, who reigned for 49 years. William the Lion earned his nickname for the lion on his flag, which you can see here. This flag is one that's stood the test of time, and remains to this day a symbol of Scotland. He was a competent ruler, but his reign was plagued by his ill-fated attempts to reclaim Northumbria from the English. He involved himself in the rebellion by Henry II's sons, including future King Richard the Lionheart, but was knocked off his horse in battle just after crying, "Now we shall see which one of us are good knights." As a result, he was forced to bend the knee to Henry II and tax the Scots to pay for the English army's occupation of Scotland, and that was intolerable to the Scottish. William the Lion spent many years dealing with revolts, until Richard the Lionheart eventually released him from his burden in order to raise money for the Third Crusade. Another concession William the Lion made was to marry his children to English nobles. For instance, his son Alexander II was married to Joan of England, though it was from the former's second wife, a lady from France, that Scotland would get its next king, Alexander III. Alexander II was an ambitious ruler who tried to claim the Western Isles, such as the Isle of Man, but it's said he was warned not to do so in a dream, and when he ignored this prophetic warning, he died of a fever before he could launch an invasion. Well, Alexander III carried on right where his father left off, and started talks with the Norse king Hakon IV over the fate of the Isles. It was clear he wouldn't have Norse king Hakon. Alexander III carried on right where his father left off, and started talks with the Norse king Hakon IV over the fate of the Isles. It was clear he wouldn't have his way without war, but he continued to stall out negotiations for as long as he could until the Norse king grew impatient and attacked. But by then, it was fall, and an autumn storm.
So music psychologists have this wonderful term that they call the indifference interval. It can refer to music which feels neither too fast nor too slow. It's the most average music possible. It's the Goldilocks tempo. It's the pH7 of music. It's at about 100 beats per minute, or roughly a beat occurring once every 600 milliseconds. It's different from person to person, but what's so fascinating about this indifference interval is that it also corresponds to your walking speed, how fast it feels most natural to just walk down the street at a comfortable pace. If you want to really feel it, take out a metronome and try walking at different tempos. First at the indifference interval of about 100 BPM, see how that feels. Then speed it up to a faster musical tempo, like maybe 180 BPM. It's going to feel a lot more chaotic and frantic, like music at 180 beats per minute, like drum and bass music. If you slowed it down to, say, 60 beats per minute, the speed of a slow and languorous jazz ballad, you're going to really feel that slow tempo in your languorous gait. So your feeling of fastness and slowness as you listen to music corresponds to the fastness and slowness of your walking gait. What's interesting here is if you slow your walking gait down to a certain point, you'll stop feeling it as a rhythm. You'll like kind of awkwardly try and time out leg movements, and the distribution of weight will be really weird if you're doing it too slow. It won't feel like walking, and it won't feel like music either at those tempos. It will be impossible to feel the groove. And so there are hard limits to how fast and how slow our brains and bodies can process music. Not play music, not perform music, but how they can process music. Let's talk about rhythmic thresholds. This video was brought to you by CuriosityStream and my streaming service Nebula, where you can watch an extended version of this music theory video. Liminal is an adjective that is used to describe the uneasy feeling of being at the threshold between two states of being. It's a word that the internet loves to describe spaces. Liminal space, the uneasy. Liminal is an adjective that is used to describe the uneasy feeling of being at the threshold between two states of being. It's a word that the internet loves to describe spaces. Liminal spaces. God, does the internet love liminal spaces. This music was written using what I'm going to call liminal rhythm, which is music that has that uneasy feeling being at the threshold of walking too slow. It's a tune called Threshold by my band Sungazer, and we've been using it as kind of an experiment of sorts this summer as we've been touring. We were very curious to see how audiences might entrain, how they might move their bodies to this music. How might they headbang? How might they groove? And the results have been interesting because different people seem to feel it different ways in different cities. It's the same music. Why the difference? Well, a couple years ago, I made some videos talking about the fastest possible music and the slowest possible music, which turns out to be about 33 beats per minute, at least as cited by Paul Fries in The Psychology of Time. This is what 33 beats per minute sounds, as cited by the difference. Feel it different ways. How might they groove? And the results have been interesting because different people seem to feel it different ways in different cities. It's the same music. Why the difference? Well, a couple years ago, I made some videos talking about the fastest possible music and the slowest possible music, which turns out to be about 33 beats per minute, at least as cited by Paul Fries in The Psychology of Time. This is what 33 beats per minute sounds like played on a drum set. It's hard, but not impossible, to connect these beats together in your brain in a process that's called subjective rhythmization. You're hearing a strong beat, and you're hearing a weak beat. If this was any slower, this might be very difficult, if not impossible to do, like walking might be. So all you gotta do, just gotta count to 4.
We swear there's no tricks.
There is no trick. We're just gonna try and count to 4 together.
1, 2, 3, 4.
found when playing live is that getting a whole audience to count to 4 in this tempo makes it so it's actually relatively easy to feel that on and off pattern, which might suggest that in a large group of people, you could actually lower the limit for rhythmic perception. You can make music which is even slower because the larger group will be able to feel it en masse more. This is total conjecture, but I thought that was kind of a cool idea. Maybe next time. But anyway, on one end of the spectrum, this music is in 4/4. But why does it sound so fast and frantic? There's a fastest possible music too. How fast our brains can process subdivisions, and usually this is pegged at about 100 milliseconds, or 10 notes per second. Yes, you can play faster than that. I know you can. That's good for you, but our brains have a hard time understanding what's going on faster than 10 notes per second. For example, check out these two piano bleeps, bleep 1 and bleep 2. In the first example, the notes were separated by 50 milliseconds, and in the second example, the notes were separated by 40 milliseconds. That's a 20% difference in speed between the two of them. Now, I don't know about you, but I have a hard time telling the difference between the two examples. The just noticeable difference between the two is very high. Compare it to these bleeps, example 1 and example 2. In the first example, the notes were separated by 500 milliseconds, and in the second example, they were separated by 400 milliseconds. The same percent difference as in the earlier bleeps, but I don't know, it was just a lot easier to tell the difference for me. So if you want your brain and other brains to notice the differences between rhythms, it doesn't really do you any good to play faster than 100 milliseconds, which is cited as the fastest possible subdivision. Yes, of course you can play faster than that, but as we heard, your brain has trouble keeping up. Sungazer's drummer Sean Crowder and I talked a lot about what these thresholds might mean in our music, what it might mean to play music that's both ridiculously fast and ridiculously slow at the same time. When you play 10 notes per second at 33 beats per minute, you get a subdivision of a little bit more than 18 notes per beat, which we just rounded up to 19 notes per beat. This is what you might call a 19 tuplet. The beat has been divided into 19 evenly spaced pulses, which is ridiculous. At 19 tuplet, it is the most tuplet. 19 of them. It is the most tuplet. 19 of them. Sean Crowder has a video out now on his channel that you can check out where he talks all about these hyper-tuplets, or high-resolution tuplets. But you could also just think of this as a really fast 1916. Now, if something is both insanely fast and insanely slow, we run into the danger of people not knowing what to do with it, not knowing how to move. But what's very interesting is people fell into a third category, one which related back to the indifference interval. You see, when you divide 19 into groupings of 6 plus 6 plus 7, you get a group which sounds like this. You're hearing 3 almost even pulses in the kick drum. It's kind of like 3/4, except that last beat is just a little bit longer. It's 100 milliseconds longer. Because of that, you can kind of just groove along to the whole thing in 3/4, even if it's not actually in 3/4. That's kind of what the audience was doing. You can see them moving as if it's in this 3, except that third beat is a little bit longer than the others.
I kind of feel it the same in threshold. I feel it like in 3 when I do the delay stuff. I tap tempo in the 3. But I try to mess with it because it's not really in 3.
If you take 33 beats per minute, that 4/4 pulse, and divide it into 3, you get 99 BPM, very close to the indifference interval of 100 beats per minute, the tempo which feels not too fast and not too slow. It's something that you can really latch onto and groove to. So in the tune, we have 3 concepts in music psychology that correspond with different tempos and time signatures. We have the low rhythmic threshold of 33 BPM going by in 4/4. We have the indifference interval of roughly 100 beats per minute going by in a lopsided 3/4. And we have the upper rhythmic threshold of 100 milliseconds whizzing by in 19 tuplets, or 1916. You know, threshold is a piece of music that you can feel many different ways and they're all right. It kind of calls into question what a time signature even is and what its value is. For us and for me, a time signature is a means to an end, and it isn't the music itself. It's a means of playing the music, but it's also a lens through which you can understand movement, how you might move to a given piece of music, how you might entrain to the pulse. It's all in 4/4, man.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I'm just feeling it, man.
Just feel it, man. Just feel it. Stop thinking about it. Feel.
That's how you do it, kids.
And we certainly aren't the first people to use liminality as a framework for composition. In fact, that's the name of the doctoral thesis that we got this from Steve Lehman. John and I initially wrote this tune, Threshold, as a kind of an experiment, a way of writing music that was both too fast and too slow at the same time. But this tune has kind of taken on new meaning in the past year.
We can think a lot about time and the relationship of people to each other in time, because the past year has radically altered the collective consciousness and how time works for us as people, and also as musicians. Time works differently.
Rhythm is just fundamentally all about events in time, and music is about how we experience time, how we experience the relationship between events, the passage of time. And God, for me, does the passage of time feel very different now than it ever did in my entire life. And so, playing this tune, Threshold, all about being in the perceptual present in such a specific way, night after night, to crowds of people counting to 4 together, has kind of given me a better appreciation of time and my relationship to it. It's been weirdly therapeutic, honestly. By the way, we have an album coming out on October 11th called Perihelion. Threshold is one of 10 tracks. Each of them has a crazy rhythmic idea behind it. And we haven't even talked about the bridge yet.
I'm curious about the bridge, where I'm playing the like ding-ding-a-ling jazz.
Oh, the bridge! You had to bring up the bridge!
If you want to learn a little bit more about liminal rhythm and watch me rant a little bit more about the perceptual present, there is